Hello, everyone, and welcome. My name is Kathy Berner. I'm coming to you from my home in Houston, Texas, because we don't have the technological capabilities at Blue Willow Bookshop to host an event like this in the store. And we'd also have a bunch of people in masks walking around behind me, and I think that would be a bit distracting. I'm the event coordinator here, and I am delighted to welcome you to this conversation with Alexis Hall about his new novel, Rosalind Palmer Takes the Cake. I've been a fan of Alexis's for a really long time, and it is just an utter joy to be here today. And I hope you guys have as wonderful a time from around the world as I hope that I do today. Please join me in welcoming Alexis Hall, who's joining us on the phone from the UK. Hi, Alexis.
Hello, can you hear me?
We can. How are you?
As always in these times, you have to adjust relative to, there's a pandemic happening. So apart from that, fine, yes. Excited to be here, a little bit nervous to be here because I've not really done something like this before, but I'm hoping this will be cool. It'll be nice to answer some questions. And thank you for inviting me.
Well, we're so glad you're here. Why don't we get started by talking just a little bit about Rosalind Palmer? What was the idea behind the first book and what's so excitingly going to be a series?
Mostly I just really like baking themed reality TV shows. And I had a vague idea that other people like that too, and that therefore maybe people might want to read about that. So I pitched that as an idea to one of the publishers that I sometimes work with, and they said it was a good idea, and there it is. So yeah, it's a rom-com about baking,
and it's a delightful one at that.
Thanks so much.
I think I would guess that a lot of people here came to you for a variety of your backlists, but especially for boyfriend material. Can you talk just a little bit about that delightful book as well?
Oh, good. That's a really open-ended question, and I am aware that there might be some more specific questions about that later. Just because of where I am in my career, particularly where I was in my career a couple of years ago, I tend to keep an eye on where the market's going, and I noted that there was a drift towards rom-com in the market, and I'm going to say frickin'. I don't know how much swearing I'm allowed to do here.
Knock yourself out.
Fair enough. I fucking love rom-coms. Rom-coms are amazing. And like they've always been a huge part of my life in a bunch of ways, although frickin' is cool too. And I really wanted to do something that evoked the spirit of the classic rom-coms that I am aware and have aged difficultly from the 1990s with a proper it's Richard Curtis. I sometimes say Tony Curtis. He's a completely different guy. He's like the guy that was in a completely different person. But I wanted something that really captured that kind of that Notting Hilly, four weddingsy kind of quirky British people being quirky and British, although brackets may be in a world that acknowledges Black people exist, close brackets kind of way. And I think it did that. I think people liked it, which was nice.
I think that's an understatement to say that people liked it. I really, really do. It's so delightful. I mean, for heaven's sakes, I even have my I have my plausible deniability pencil today because I've already gone through Mom's Special Curry. But it's just fantastic. So let's move a little. We've got some in-depth questions about Rosalind that I'd love to go through with you. The first one is from Monica. She would like to know, will the Bake Expectations trilogy have related characters and a continuous story, or will it be more like the Spires novel set in the world of competitive baking?
Sort of, yes, related characters, no continuous story is the short answer. So the idea is that I wanted it to function like a TV show with the sort of the with the caveat that you see a lot of behind the scenes stuff. So the idea is that there will be recurring characters because the hosts will be the same, because the staff who work on the show will be the same. So Jennifer Hallett will be in all of them, Grace Forsyth will be in all of them, Wilfred Honey and Marianne Wolvercott will be in all of them, but the contestants will be different every year.
I love that idea. I love that idea. So speaking of Jennifer, Karen comments that Jennifer is a particularly vociferously foul-mouthed character. Is her use of language one of the British class markers you referenced in the reader discussion questions? And if yes, can you explain more about this or other British class markers for your American readers?
Absolutely. So weirdly, like, actually a general thing about British class markers that is sort of generally interesting is that often with British class stuff, and I don't know how similar this is for Americans, you have the way the middle class do it and the way everyone else does it. And weirdly, swearing is quite similar. Like, the middle class don't swear because it's vulgar. The working classes swear because they don't abide by middle class values, and the upper classes swear because they don't give a shit and no one can tell them what to do. In a lot of Jennifer's character sort of actually tributes to Malcolm Tucker from The Thick of It, the British political drama series, and that itself is, as far as I can tell, just really specifically based on Alastair Campbell, who is like a real British politician, and his class background is complicated. Like he's Scottish. I think he's Scottish. He worked for the Labour Party. I think he's probably from quite a working class background, but at the same time, he went to a grammar school. He was very high up in the halls of power. So the class markers there are complex. As for the other stuff, I mean, it's really there's a line in Terry Pratchett's Small Gods about how fish have no word for water. And so obviously it's really quite hard for me to pick out all the stuff in the book that is a British class marker, because basically everything in the book is a British class marker. Like, I think someone else I think I've seen in other questions that say, would people talk about the fact that Alan has an I in his name? That's kind of a class marker. No working class person would ever call their kid Alan with an I. The fact that Harry's named after a royal is kind of a class marker, because again, middle class people think that's a bit vulgar. One of the ones that I thought was really interesting, actually, I'm sorry, it occurs to me that describing my own work as really interesting is really obnoxious. I think sometimes you'll look at something and not realize you've done it and be like, oh, that was interesting. But one of the things quite early on, and again, I should say that I know there's a couple of people who have just started reading the book or haven't got the book yet, and so I will try to avoid spoilering, but I will talk about some specific details. There's quite early on, when Rosalind first interacts with Harry, he calls her love and she calls him out on it because that's seen as sexist. But throughout the book, loads of middle class people call her darling. But because that's in a middle class coded way, it's not read as sexist. And you have this really difficult intersectionality thing, which is that on the one hand, like, yeah, you shouldn't go around calling women love or darling. On the other hand, there are class groups in the UK where just love is what women call women and what men call women and what women call men. And basically the only people who don't call each other love are men talking to other men who call each other mate. And like, the acceptability of that is complex. And obviously it's because when you go out of that environment, it reads very differently, and there is an element to, and then you get the complex question of the extent to which, like, is the onus on working class people I don't want to get deep into the question of where the power lies between working class men and middle class women. Basically, is the onus on a working class man to change his dialect for the comfort of middle class women, or is it the other way around? And that is not a question I'm going to answer.
Yeah.
But it's really noticeable that, like, no one says that it's wrong to say, oh Tabitha darling, what a marvelous garden party. Whereas people do think it's wrong to say, Jane love, what a wonderful bash you put on. Again, I should apologise for my bad accents in all directions.
No, it's all good. And I see what you're saying, and I think maybe part of it is that both, in any circumstance, try to believe that the person is operating with a good heart
Yeah,
and with the best of intentions.
yeah. Unless they're not, some people are.
And speaking of a good heart and the best of intentions, Harry is such a dear character that Marianne cannot get enough of. Might we see him in future books or bonus scenes?
Ooh, I mean, I never rule out bonus scenes. I haven't got anything specifically planned. I might do cameos from existing characters in future books. Actually, the current draft of book 2 has a cameo from Alan. Spoiler. I will admit that I'm not planning anything, but I'll see how things crop out over the next couple of books, put it that way.
That's totally fair. And I'm so excited to hear that you're kind of going the Spires route, where we'll be in the world, but not with the same characters, because that leads me to questions from a number of people, including Sarah, Monica, and Kamala. Your characters are so richly drawn. How much do you plan out your character development? Do you kind of let that develop organically, or do you outline it and have character boards beforehand?
It's sort of a little from column A, little from column B. I'm very, very rarely a boards
Okay.
person, but at the same time, I think particularly in romance, because obviously romance is an incredibly character-focused genre.
Right.
I think, to me, if you don't have a sense of who your, two, or if you're writing polyromance more than two, that's not something I've ever personally done, who your protagonists are and how their personalities fit together and complement each other, and how they change each other if they do, which they usually do, because otherwise you haven't got a character arc. I mean, again, this gets, sidebar, that gets complex because it gets into the narratives of changing people, which is tricky, but how they grow individually and together through their relationship. And you have to have an idea of what that arc is going to at least vaguely look like before you start, or what's the book about.
Right.
If I hadn't had a sense of like roughly what Rosalind's emotional arc would look like in Rosalind, then it would just be a book about a woman making cakes. To be fair, that would be in many ways lovely.
Right.
But no, you have to have a sense of who it's about in
right.
Profound's really, again, a really obnoxious word to use, but in a strong who sense. So yeah, they are. What's their deal?
Well, they're spectacular. And I mean, I'm sure the audience would agree with me. I mean, I can go back to them again and again and again, and just find so much joy from immersing myself back in the worlds you create with all those characters, because they're so real to me. Gabriella would like to know, what book or books made you a fan of rom-coms?
Oh gosh, I was a fan of rom-coms. That's movie rom-coms back in the 90s.
Okay.
Romance in general, it's sort of the really glib answer is Princess Bride, or more specifically, like the arc that is it Fred Savage character,
yes,
the little boy character. I again get Fred Savage mixed up with Dan Savage, who's a very different person. Because the whole arc of that movie is there's a little boy and his granddad is like, do you want to hear this? I'm sorry, that's going to come across as really racist. I apologize. In the Columbo voice, because it's Columbo, isn't it? Is like,
it is Columbo.
You want to hear this story? It's got kissing in there. He's like, kissing. I don't know why that's my Dan Savage voice. That's just my Dan Savage voice now. And my Fred Savage voice. I am bad at public speaking. My sincere
You're great.
apologies.
Everybody agrees with you that we have trouble keeping Dan and Fred straight, or figuring out who's who. But no, but I see where you're going with it. Yeah. The arc.
Yeah, and well, I think particularly because the arc that character goes through is like, when you are socialized male, just the notion of reading a book with kissing in it because it's got kissing in it is genuinely alien, even though when I, like, basically a little, like, more than a decade ago now, I kind of stopped took stock of the kind of stuff I actually like to read and realized that a lot of it was stuff that had kissing in it, and that maybe I should stop being so Fred Savage at the beginning of Princess Bride about it and be a bit more Fred Savage at the end of Princess Bride about it, because I've always read stuff that was kind of on the genre borderline, like again, some of which was problematically, like I was like I really like the Anita Blake books, because what's not to like about girls punching / kissing vampires. I was, I read quite a lot of like kind of the crossover YA stuff. A big fan of Christian Kashori's like Graceling series, which again was a very wonderful series, quite strong romance elements. And then from there, I kind of got into more specifically genre romance stuff that had, but often in the end it was closer to the kind of the nerdy weird fiction stuff I've been habitually reading my whole life. So I love Laura Kinsale's historicals, and they have a really intense sense of world and world building that can frankly kick the shit out of a reasonable number of fantasy writers. Similarly with Nalini Singh's many seriously bizarre worlds, but brilliant. And it's one of the things I find, again, particularly as someone who writes sort of in a who dabbles across genres, like but who has a foot in romance and a little bit of a foot in fantasy. I do find the extent to which romance is looked down as a genre and other genres aren't is really frustrating to me. And obviously, like fantasy's looked down too, but in a slightly different way. Because there are huge amounts of people who take some fantasy things at least very, very seriously. And there are one of the examples I like to give is so in like J.D. Robb's In Death series, that's got some of the most interesting science fiction concepts I have seen in fiction. Like, you've got the whole thing where homemakers are paid a salary by the state and it's treated as a career. That's a fantastic bit of social science fiction. But because it's not about lasers and spaceships, it kind of doesn't get talked about.
Right.
And basically, and from there, I've been reading quite, I've obviously read much more broadly. I've looked at a lot of things. So basically, it's a lot of stuff, and I've always been interested in. Basically, it's the Princess Bride arc broadly. It's come for the sword fight, stay for the kissing, if you like.
Okay, that needs to be a t-shirt. Come for the sword fight, stay for the kissing. Alexis fans, there you go. I completely agree with you. And I think one of the things I love about romance, and one of the things I really love about your romance books, are that I know and I hope where the arc is going to go. It's either going to be a happy for now or a happily ever after. Mm-hmm. But what's interesting for me is the journey along the way, and all the well-developed secondary characters who bring so much to the story. That is, and it allows you to discuss a number of different issues in a very candid, organic way. Mm-hmm. And I think that's a really important thing for us to be able to read, because that allows us to see these lived experiences up on the page. And that provides not only representation for those who have lived those experiences, but in America, we say we like books that provide mirrors and windows. So it's reflecting back and allowing you to see someone else's lived experience to hopefully move towards empathy and understanding.
That makes sense.
Priya would like to know if you would ever consider going on a book tour.
Oh dear. Probably not. I'm a very introverted person. I'm enjoying this, but I was really quite stressed for much of today, just because interacting with large numbers of people at once is quite difficult for me. There's also, just one of the questions I was going up the chat was how am I dealing with the commitments I've got coming up, and part of it is that I do tend to use my time to write stuff, and like one of the things that's again, I'm going to do a tangent. I'm going to do a sidebar. I sincerely apologize.
It's all good.
Many years ago, there was a radio play on Radio 4 called Six Writers in Search of an Author, in which writers did a fictional biography of a fictional author. And I might have made it up in my head, but I have a very strong memory of it. And the only episode I remember is a guy who was talking about a writer who's one of those writers that you like shamefacedly admit you've never read a book by, and everyone pretends they've read a book by, but they probably haven't. And the twist at the end of the radio play was that this person never actually had a book published. She just did a lot of like public-facing author stuff and was very, very good at that. But all of her books were terrible and so never got published. And she just went around doing tours and talking. And I think that does encapsulate the fact that there is actually, like, being a writer encompasses multiple things. And the bit of being a writer I like is the bit where you are putting words on paper, or sometimes taking words off paper and putting different words onto paper, then taking the words off and putting them on. And so it's the bit that actually involves producing content. And, you know, wonderful as people are and beautiful it is to have opportunities like this to interact with people, it's not the part of the job that I invest most of my time in. Mm-hmm. And also, of course, particularly most book tours and things like that happen. I mean, I could do a book tour of England on a bicycle in a day, essentially. Obviously not quite, but like, it's very, very small. And I don't live in America. Most book tours happen in America. I'd have to go to America. It would be a huge, complex kind of thing. I'm also, the other thing is I'm not actually that well known, so not that many people would probably come to it. People are less well known than you think they are. I am sidebar. Okay. There's a British quiz show called Pointless, where they you have a bunch. The idea is you have a bunch of questions and you have to work out the ones with the most obscure answers. And they had a round that was TV shows expressed as haikus, and one of them, I can't remember what haiku was. And you had to work out guess which one it was, but find the one that people would get. And one of them was this haiku that had a reference to Winterfell in it. I was going like, oh well, loads of people have got that one. That's Game of Thrones. That's the biggest TV show. 22 people out of 100 got it. Because things are less popular than you think they are.
That's true.
If only 22% of people have heard of Game of Thrones, a significantly smaller percentage of people have heard of me.
That's fair. But I mean, I guess I'm very grateful then for the virtual world, and that we're able to be in conversation with you in the UK and people. I don't want to add any stress, but we've got people from Africa, Australia, Europe, all across the US. And that's so exciting because this also provides a way for all of us who really enjoy your books to get together and celebrate that and have a chance to hear you talk about them. So
that is lovely. And genuinely, the internet is, if you are like me and spend most of your time in your house or very briefly going to the shops to buy food, then yeah, the internet is great. And this kind of event, I am perfectly fine. I'm getting to a state of being perfectly fine with. Actually, physically going out and traveling and things, I think that would.
Yeah,
I think it's a cost benefit thing.
Yes.
As regards, the various benefits, but the mental health.
Right. But I think, and as you, I don't know if you see in the chat coming through, but everybody's like, fine, if you want to stay home and write books, you stay home and write books. We love you.
That is very much my plan.
It's all good.
Yeah. Plus the ducks will miss me.
Exactly. You can't let the ducks miss you. Moving on to a slightly different topic. This one is from Kristen. Lots of straight people read queer romance. Lots of women read male fiction. She's one of them, as am I. As a reader, feminist, and mother of a queer teen, I worry about fetishizing and exoticizing the lives of people with specific histories and experiences, especially because I enjoy the lack of the patriarchy in a male-male romance. Do you have thoughts on the market for male-male, and more importantly, ways to read ethically and thoughtfully, whether own voices can and should incorporate that particular part of romance? Oh, I'm sorry, Kirsten. I apologize.
Okay, sorry, Kirsten. Okay, so first of all, this is a really, really complicated question.
It is.
I'm going to talk about this for potentially the rest of the 45 minutes. I do apologize. the absolute first, the first thing I will say is that I am not the diversity pope. Sorry, that's a verbal tick I've got into using. It's probably a little bit anti-Catholic. I just mean that I don't have a supreme position of spiritual authority. I can't turn around and say, yes, go forth and read this or don't read this. It's like, this is just going to be my opinion as one person
Understood.
with basic understanding. The second thing I would say is, and again, this is not telling you how to parent way, but I think as the mother of a queer teen, the person whose opinions on LGBTQ matters that are important are the opinions of the queer teen. And I think that's, I'm not trying to tell you how to raise a kid. I just mean that very often we view kind of social justice issues in general, kind of demographics focused issues in general, as like they're this big monolithic thing with a single right answer to stuff, when actually it's not. And right down to that, a lot, there are plenty of LGBT people who don't like the reclaimed use of the word queer, for example. I understand it's sort of considered really quite bad in fact, Texas, because of like, historical associations. So really, if you want to know how these issues affect your children, and I know saying talk to your children is like, I am aware that when I was a teenager, I would not particularly want to talk to my parents about anything, but be guided by the people in your life is my biggest piece of advice for literally anything like that. It's in the same way that like you get a remarkable number of men who make a really big deal about being feminists, but then treat the women they know like shit, mentioning no major television producers. And in the same way, the really important thing is, because if your teenager feels that it's not inappropriate for you to read LGBTQ fiction, stop reading it. Genuinely, because your relationship with your kid is more important than whether I sell books. As for the rest of it, okay, I'm going to break a lot of this stuff down. I'm going to go into some detail. I'm going to get into some fiddly details. Actually, I noticed someone in the chat has just mentioned the patriarchy thing, and that was the first thing I was going to mention. I am very aware that a lot of people who read specifically fiction as either a subset of or genre slightly distinct from LGBTQ fiction sometimes express the notion that they like as, I'm sorry, is it Kirsten or Kristen? I've got mixed up now. Kirsten was saying, because they like the lack of patriarchy in it. And I think I understand what they're getting at with that. But I think it's, so for example, if you've read boyfriend material, so much of that is about men's relationships with their fathers. So much of it is based in really quite specific ideas about gender and gender roles. I think and obviously again, I'm not going to speak on behalf of women, but obviously for women, that is likely to be a lot less likely to bring up complicated shit than patriarchal or normative ideas in a book with female protagonists, particularly a book with a female protagonist in a relationship with a male romantic interest. Like there are often a bunch of patriarchal assumptions that go into that kind of thing that some female readers will find difficult. I think it is at least charitable to acknowledge that there are patriarchal assumptions that go into everything. Patriarchy is like colonialism; it affects every aspect of everything ever.
Right.
That go into things that don't have women in them, but I can appreciate that for a female reader, it can be safer. And there are often, I am never going to tell someone not to do something if they are doing it for their own emotional safety. That would be, I think, wrong of me.
I think you answered it well, and
Yeah.
I appreciate that. I know that that's not an easy thing to wrangle.
Yeah, I have more to say if you want me to.
Well, we've probably only got about 20 minutes left, and I've got 9 billion questions.
Then let's move on. Thanks so much.
So we're going to move on. Kirsten, thanks again for that question.
No.
Here is one from Moving to Glitterland. And this is from the Q&A in the Zoom. I think it's PETA. For the Glitterland re-release, can we have a crochet or knit pattern for a Glardigan included, please?
Oh God, I very briefly tried to learn both crocheting and knitting, but then I realized again, because I spend all my time writing, actually complex hobbies are quite difficult to take up. So I'd have to learn to crochet. So I'm going to make no promises.
Or you know what? You could throw that out to your Spires fans.
I could, yes.
You could also ask for a Glardigan pattern. So anybody out there.
I will say, if fans want to make Glardigan patterns, I will absolutely, I will absolutely look at those. I'll probably retweet them. I genuinely have a slight don't put things produced by fans into books I then sell commercially thing, because that feels exploitative to me.
Yes.
But by all means, and yes, Ducky does take a lot of my free time. She's actually quite independent now. She's 4.
We could even make a Glardigan for Ducky, which would be awesome. So here's one from Julie. She's a mental health therapist, and she really feels that your rep of various mental health issues in many of your books is brilliant and so deftly done. Is that intuitive, or do you research before you work those aspects into your books?
A little complicated. I say that a lot. It depends. Again, this becomes a slightly difficult one because it touches on things that can get personal for obvious reasons. It will depend on how much experience I've had of those things in the bits of my life I'm talking about.
Okay.
But generally, I will always do. I'll very often do additional research if it's something that I haven't peripherally or only known about.
Speaking of research, Chris comments that the recipes are such a charming addendum to your books. I agree. I want to make Darien shepherd pie. I was reminded of that today. But who tests and develops them? Do you do that, or do you?
Oh yeah, no, I mean, I do it, and with the ones in Rosalind in particular, I also got I think someone. Sorry, I lose track of it was Sam. Sorry. So I'm at the other end, also tested them to make sure that my recipes could be followed, particularly because those ones were very strongly written in character.
Right.
And so, sorry, it takes me a moment to get these things right sometimes. So yeah, I will tend to do them myself in house, and then I'll have an enormous cake sitting around, which will just kind of be sitting there for a month. But then and that's often it, because there's slightly more of a team behind Rosalind, because there's a trade paperback. I was able to actually get someone to check that my recipe didn't just make no sense or not work for Americans.
Well, we appreciate you doing it, because I have made so many batches of Harry's Cheesy Bites and I love them so much.
Oh, I'm glad you like them. How good aren't they?
They're delicious. And when it's just my husband and I in the house, we need to share them with neighbors. So both Maria and Serena have a question about Artie St. Ives, that lovely series. They thank you for creating such rich, full characters with so much depth and personality. Do you think there might ever be a 4th book in the Artie series? I really want to see Caspian make Lancaster pay.
It's weirdly, I did originally conceive of it as a 4-book series, although I think the plan was for the 4th book to kind of go completely batshit the way that those kind of series sometimes do. I think there was I think at one point one of my plans was to have Nathaniel murdered, which I wouldn't do now. Because I know a lot of people have mixed feelings about Nathaniel. I think I have enough sympathy with him. I don't want to wind up just be face down in Caspian's pool. I think there are things that they could. I think there are things that we could. There are places the story could definitely go from here. I would say I don't think Lancaster is ever going to pay. Like, I think it's I think one of the difficult things about, like, so obviously, first of all, like the RD books are very archetypal. Like, everyone's surname is a proper noun for a reason. Not a proper noun, a noun. Yeah, you know what I mean. And because Lancaster just so embodies this, toxic, abusive privilege, and maybe I'm being really freaking cynical, and obviously things are slowly getting better, but guys like that don't pay most of the time, and
Right.
even when they do, often it winds up being this really problematic kind of sacrificial lamb thing, where it's like, okay, we've got the bad man out, definitely don't need to fix the system. So no, yeah, Lancaster is never getting his, because they don't.
Thank you, Tracy. I agree. Christopher says, you've said that you believe strongly in the idea of the death of the author. Why do you believe so strongly in that principle?
Oh gosh, partly for science. I mean, partly because I genuinely think that it's as close as a literary theory can get to just kind of being objectively correct. And there are some basic kind of, there's some fairly basic things, like, I think the one that's often used in like universities is like, well, if a book fell out of space, you should be able to analyze it. With my kind of nerd hat on, it's particularly when you get into kind of particularly in the present day, with kind of living authors involved with continuing series, and with the increasing obsession with kind of canon. I'm doing air quotes that you obviously can't see.
Right.
The idea that what is in the author's head affects the text just literally makes no sense to me. Like, particularly as an author, I know that I've changed my mind about things. I know that I've had one intention at the start of writing a book, one intention at the end. Which intent matters? Is it what they were writing when they wrote the first draft, when they wrote the first edit? Is it just whatever they think at the moment? And if that's the case, like, does that mean the book stops having meaning when the author is asleep? Clearly not. It's the text has to be what it is.
And I think, and I've heard other authors talk about how once the book is in the hands of the reader, then it belongs to the reader.
Exactly.
And I mean, just like so many of us develop such attachments to your characters and characters in other books, they then become part of us. And that's one of the beauties about books and literature and sharing things like that. Total shift in conversation from Aaron. Who is your favorite Bake Off contestant in any season?
Oh gosh. Wow, that is like obviously I really love Nadia on her season. Yes! Because and also she got a ton of really complex shit from the newspapers. Ian, who binned his cake, I have mixed feelings about, I will admit. I, in retrospect, feel quite protective of Ruby. Because obviously she again got a ton of shit that she probably didn't deserve, or definitely didn't deserve. And again, and in this really, in this incredibly grounded in a bunch of really complex social things way. The whole thing where like kind of everyone was like, oh, she's probably sleeping with poor Hollywood, and like a couple of years later she's like, I'm a lesbian. So yeah, it's I kind of like. I mean, the other thing I would say is obviously I have not watched the show since it went to Channel 4.
Okay.
Because of BBC loyalty.
Yep.
But basically everyone on the early series was either seemed lovely, basically was educated enough that if they weren't lovely, they seemed that way, which is what matters.
Exactly. I completely agree. Aaron
No, go.
Oh, no. Aaron would like to know, do you have a dream cast in mind if there was an adaptation of either Rosaline or of boyfriend material?
I tend to avoid dream casting my books, partly because occasionally these things do get like actually put in front of people that will do that, film rights are a thing. I also really don't, just it goes back to the death of the author thing. don't like to put out like physical descriptions of my characters beyond the ones that are in the books, because I think it's really important that readers be able to imagine them however they like.
I love that. Yeah. Kathleen has a question for discussion. Would you rather be an anglerfish or a sarcastic fringe head? And why?
I think I'd rather be an anglerfish, but I'm definitely a sarcastic fringe head is the answer. Like anglerfish are great. Oh, I suppose actually I think, of course, the other thing is that like, I think I'd rather be a female anglerfish because female anglerfish are really cool. Whereas male anglerfish are just tiny bags of sperm that attach to female anglerfish. I mean, in some ways, it's quite a cushy life. You just kind of hang around on someone's abdomen and they do all the work. But
yeah, that's fair. That's totally fair. Karina would like to know if you can remember, what is the funniest typo you've ever written?
Oh gosh. Embarrassingly, I don't think I can remember that off the top of my head. I'm so sorry.
No worries. Michelle comments, and I completely agree with her. Amelie was fabulous. Did you have someone in mind when you created that character?
I don't think so, really. I mean, I tend to shy away from interpretations of fiction in general, which kind of assume that characters are based on real people. Like one of the things, one of my pet peeves in movies about authors is like a thing that's exactly the thing from the famous book will happen, and then the author will write the famous book. You know, it's like where Shakespeare in Love is like he has a Romeo and Juliet type relationship, then writes Romeo and Juliet. This is not how it works. He's not based on anyone in particular. She's just kind of a platonic ideal of an adorable child, I think.
Well, and that's totally fair. But she was so spectacular. There were so many of her lines that I was underlining because they're so funny and so absolutely fantastic. You just brought her to life. People in the chat, I am a member of the Alexis Hall Discord channel. So I think if you Google Alexis Hall Discord, it'll take you on how to get there. So it's fantastic. And I loved seeing the shout outs to this event this morning. That was really made my day. Okay. Have you ever considered narrating one of your own audiobooks?
Oh no. I am a very big believer. Basically, I'm the opposite of that guy who believes specialization is for insects. Who, again, I think was a science fiction writer. I am a huge believer in specialization, and I am not a voice actor. I am good enough at voice actory stuff that I can run a decent D&D game where some of the NPCs sound a bit different, but no, like apart from the kind of the read by the author cachet, like we actors are good at acting. Yeah. Like I've been very happy with everyone who's done the voice acting stuff reading for all my audiobooks. They're really good at it. They're better at it than I am.
That's totally fair. And I will tell you, is it Joe Jameson who did Boyfriend Material?
Yes.
Oh my gosh. I am not ashamed to tell y'all that I've probably listened to that 25 times and I've been delighted every single time. I was telling people in the green room, that is my comfort listen. I can listen to it anytime. And I'm so excited to hear the Rosalind narration. It
is excellent. It's really, really good.
I'm just thrilled. We're running to the end of our time, Alexis. I could keep going forever and ever and ever. So let me wrap with one question that is how we wrap all of our events. Can you tell me one book? It can be from when you were a child or now, or when you were at university, one book that makes you feel like home.
Oh gosh, one book that makes you feel like home. Wow. I think I am going to have to go, having already mentioned it. I actually have to go with Terry Pratchett's Small Gobs, which I have talked about before. I was again, if you're British and into fantasy, you know the Terry Pratchett thing. Like Terry Pratchett is, I think, the only famous person whose death I felt genuinely emotionally affected by. if you like, just because like that was such a huge part of my reading life and my being a nerdy kid life. And Small God, I think I read Small Gods at exactly the right age when like, and it's quite unusual, it's quite standalone, it's quite angry about religion. And I was at the age where I wasn't burned out on Dawkinsisms. And so it really affected me in a bunch of ways that I'm sure I could write a list of them, but yeah, I appreciate it's a non-romantic option, but it's the book I go to.
No, but that, I mean, for me, it depends on where you are in your life when you think about it, but just the joy of reading the right book at the right time is something that you cannot unexperience and just stays with you forever.
Yeah.
I'm so pleased that you were willing to do this, to have this chat with us. Thank you.
It's been I'm very pleased you invited me. Thank you so much.
It's a pleasure. Everybody in the chat, thank you so much for being here. We're just so grateful for your interest and your participation. Like I said, I am going to forward the questions that were in the Q&A and the questions that everyone emailed me. I'm going to forward those to Alexis's team. And Alexis, if you want to do anything with those on social media or in one of your lovely newsletters, knock yourself out. At the end of this, we all vanish into the ether. So I will just close by saying thank you so much, everyone, for spending part of your afternoon, evening, middle of the night, because we're around the world. This was a great example of the communal joy that we can find in these very strange times. And I'm so grateful to have participated. So Alexis, from the bottom of my heart, thank you.
Thank you so much. It's been lovely.
Okay, bye, everybody.
Goodbye.